What is this garbage you're watching? I want to watch the news.
Are you making headway at least?
This is the news.
Security Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Law Enforcement, and Intelligence will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony from expert witnesses from the national security realm that will inform our understanding of anomalous health incidents, or more commonly known as Havana syndrome. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good afternoon and welcome to the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, Law Enforcement, and Intelligence. We're holding this important hearing to examine anomalous health incidents, otherwise known as AHIs or Havana syndrome, and discuss the potential targeting of U.S. government officials and their families in the Homeland and elsewhere. Although this issue has recently gained significant media attention, the issues surrounding anomalous health incidents or Havana syndrome are not new. Dating back to 2014, a number of U.S. diplomatic, military, and intelligence officials and their families have reported major medical symptoms that have affected their auditory and sensory motor skills. These issues became public in late 2016 after a group of Canadian diplomats and U.S. government employees and their families assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Havana, Cuba, began experiencing similar symptoms. After the reported incidents in Havana, government officials and their families began reporting similar symptoms in the People's Republic of China, Vietnam, Germany, Austria, Serbia, Australia, Taiwan, Colombia, as well as here in the United States. Multiple agencies within the intelligence community have conducted assessments in an attempt to identify the factors that cause AHIs, or who, if anyone, is responsible for these incidents. Unfortunately, none of these studies could conclusively identify the causes of these incidents. However, the State Department commissioned a study through the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine that found, and I quote, unusual presentation of acute, directional, or location-specific early phase signs, symptoms, and observations reported by Department of State employees to be consistent with the effects of directed pulsed radiofrequency energy. Many of the chronic, non-specific symptoms are also consistent with known radiofrequency effects, such as dizziness, headache, fatigue, nausea, anxiety, cognitive deficits, and memory loss, end quote. Since the National Academy's findings, generally, the IC, the intelligence community, has stood by their initial findings and maintains that the origins of these symptoms are still unknown and not likely to be derived from the actions of a foreign adversary. Today, we hope to gain a better understanding of anomalous health incidents to address this pressing issue. And it's paramount that we acknowledge the gravity of this situation. And I think when you really look at what we're doing today, it's to have a transparent discussion, to talk to our three expert witnesses, to hear in a manner consistent with what they went through, what the facts are. And as Congress, the role on oversight is so important. That's what we're doing today. And so I'm proud that this is a bipartisan effort. And I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you. This is an important issue, deals with the health and welfare of our government officials as well as others. Thank you again, Mr. Pfluger, and good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to witnesses today. I'm here today filling in for our ranking member, Mr. Magaziner, who I'm happy to say he and Julia welcomed their daughter, baby daughter, to their family just, I think, a day or so ago. So Magaziner, Mr. Magaziner, enjoy your time with your beautiful family. Today's hearing has been called to examine the anomalous health incidents affecting a range of U.S. national security personnel, including intelligence officials, members of our armed forces, and diplomats. Sometimes referred as Havana syndrome, anomalous health incidents were first reported, as the chairman suggested, back in 2014 by U.S. personnel assigned to our embassy in Havana. Many have described the symptoms that were chronic and debilitating. Sadly, these incidents have not been isolated to Havana. U.S. personnel have reported such incidents as Hanoi, Vienna, London, Moscow, as well as here in the United States, in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Pennsylvania. There have been several investigations into the cause of these incidents, including a study by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, several studies by Jason, an independent group of expert scientists, a brain imaging study by the University of Pennsylvania, as well as others, and that list is not exhaustive. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from retired Lieutenant Colonel Greg Edgren among our witnesses who ran the Pentagon's investigation into these situations. We also understand the Intelligence and Foreign Service Affairs Committees have been engaged in an intensive bipartisan oversight of these anomalous health incidences for a while now. And last year, the intelligence community completed a coordinated assessment regarding the causes of these incidents and found no evidence of adversarial activity. I know the lack of a finding in these cases after nearly 8 years of incidences is a source of frustration for the victims and frankly for all of us as well. And I am pleased that recently the Biden administration came out with a statement that they will continue to conduct comprehensive examinations of these effects and their possible causes. The Director of National Intelligence, Ms. Arvil Haynes, reiterated these comments in her testimony to the Senate last week, stating that the intelligence community is continuing its investigations into what happened in these situations. This committee, I should say, is dedicated to working with our partners, the administration, and other relevant congressional committees to ensure that such examinations, investigations proceed, and that we take care of our people. Let me repeat, we will continue to take care of those afflicted by the Havana syndrome, and will continue to look for sources and causes. And Mr. Chairman, I want to ask also unanimous consent that Mr. Eric Swalwell be permitted to sit in this committee and ask questions of today's witnesses.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and with that, I yield.
I think the ranking member and other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. I ask that our witnesses please rise. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. And let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I'd now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Mr. Gregory Edgren is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and a former U.S. government official. He led the investigation efforts for the Defense Intelligence Agency into the causes of AHIs and who, if anyone, was responsible for causing these incidents. Mr. Edgren's career has covered 8 countries and 3 U.S. embassies. He now serves as the CEO of Advanced Echelon LLC, a company in the United States with interagency experience leading AHI efforts. Mr. Christo Grozev is an award-winning journalist and the lead investigator for The Insider. He is also a member of Bellingcat Productions, which looks to translate Bellingcat investigations into a range of new media products. He was the lead Russia researcher at Bellingcat until February of 2023. His investigations into the identity of the suspects in the 2018 Novichok poisonings in the United Kingdom earned him and his team the European Prize for Investigative Journalism. And lastly, Mr. Mark Zaid is a Washington, D.C. based attorney who specializes in crisis management and handling administrative and litigation matters, mainly relating to national security, international law, foreign, sovereign, and diplomatic immunity, and the Freedom of Information/Privacy Acts. Mr. Zaid often represents former and current federal employees, including military officers, defense contractors, and other national security professionals and whistleblowers. Again, I thank the witnesses for being here today. I'll offer each of you an opening statement. I know you've submitted those as well, so please, if you don't mind, summarize it, and we have a timer to keep to 5 minutes, so that then we'll go into the question and answer period. I now recognize Lieutenant Colonel Greg Edgren for 5 minutes on his opening statement.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, ranking members, congressmen. It is an honor to speak with you today and give voice to the unseen. the U.S. government, AHI survivors, and their families. My name is Greg Edgreen. I stood up and led the DIA's task force, which was in charge of taking care of our survivors and determining the cause. For background, I'm not an analyst. I'm a retired Army and intelligence officer. The following are my personal opinions and do not represent the opinions of the government. Given the classification of this topic, many of my comments will have to be made at a future closed-door session. As a country, we have been here before. Most people think this all started in Havana in 2016, the widely reported Havana syndrome. This led to the U.S. withdrawing most of its staff and ending rapprochement between Havana and Washington. But before Havana syndrome, there was the Moscow signal. Soviet intelligence bathed the U.S. Embassy in Moscow with microwave transmissions. The health effects were similar to what we see today. There are many examples of syndromes and ailments from Americans injured in the line of duty that the government did not recognize for many years, which were eventually proven. Agent Orange used in Vietnam, the Gulf War syndrome, burn pits during the forever wars of Iraq and Afghanistan. In all of these examples, America took too long to acknowledge these injuries, and our service members languished without care. Havana syndrome is no different. The gaslighting of AHI survivors continues to this day as history repeats itself. Throughout all this, I learned America's best men and women in national security are being targeted and neutralized in a global campaign. AHIs have been reported in the press in every continent except for Antarctica, with a large percentage of these attacks occurring in the homeland, in American, in this town. The impact has been that mission-critical government officials working abroad and at home are being removed from their post with TBIs. Don't take my word for it. Nikolai Patrushev, the secretary of Russia's Security Council, wrote in September 2023, and I quote, "In recent years, hundreds of employees of foreign intelligence services involved in organizing intelligence and subversive activities against our country have been neutralized," end quote. The American people are losing strategic warning and decision-making advantage in great power competition. America's eyes are being blinded, their voices muted, their ears deafened. This is emboldening our other strategic rivals, such as China, and could encourage North Korea and Iran to take similar actions with no repercussions. We collected a large body of data, ranging from signals intelligence to human intelligence to open source reporting and everything in between. Unfortunately, I can't get into specifics based on the classification, but I can tell you, at an early stage, I started to focus on Moscow, and consistently, there was a Russian nexus. Since 2010, the number of counterintelligence incidents began to rise, and so did Russian gray zone activities. These included assassinations, poisonings, sabotage attacks against NATO allies and others, many of which has been documented by Christo. After talking with the survivors who were hit in the US and abroad, I quickly realized these were no longer isolated incidents. There were reports of CI incidents, which included harassment, room intrusions, houses being defiled, tossed, pets poisoned, assaults on our personnel, officers and diplomats being drugged, doxing, families harassed, then an attack via directed energy, a red line to many because of the debilitating nature of these weapons. The US government never hit back, and our nation's hidden heroes continue to be targeted today. Investigators often talk about motive, means, and opportunity. First, let's look at the motive. When President Putin says things like, if one looks into the security sphere, new physical principles weapons will ensure the security of any country in the near historic perspective. We understand this very well and are working on it. If you know anything about the Russian Ministry of Defense, this is referring to directed energy weapons. Second, the means. Look at the contract for directed energy weapons, which is uncovered by my colleague Christo. Look at the open source photos of Putin awarding scientists prizes for innovation for weapons based on new physical principles. And third is the opportunity. Of course they can do this. As openly reported in 2014, 3 CIA officers were stationed in Ukraine that year during a popular revolt that overthrew Moscow's preferred leader. Later, those CIA officers went on to other assignments and reported AHI attacks, one in Uzbekistan, one is in Vietnam, and the third officer's family hit in London. Despite this large body of data, the ODNI said there's nothing to see here. Everything is dismissed. And last month, the NIH said there's no evidence of physical damage despite all survivors reporting the same symptoms. This same study is now under review for its methodology. I would like to point this committee to the AHI experts panel, whose findings were released in 2022, which saw all the same intelligence and information we did, but came to the opposite conclusion of the DNI. They noted that the signs and symptoms of AHIs are genuine and compelling, and that pulsed electromagnetic energy, particularly in the radio frequency range, explains the core characteristics. I think the bar for AHI attribution was set so high because we do not, as a country and a government, want to face some very hard truths. Can we secure America? Are these massive counterintelligence failures? Can we protect our people on American soil? Is this an act of war? Despite our history of walking away from those who sacrifice for their country, I am optimistic. With congressional support, with your support, and an informed public, it is time to take action. This is a nonpartisan issue which has spanned several administrations. Let's start to get this right with executive and legislative action. First,
And Mr.
please.
Edgren, I'm going to go ahead and, if you can wrap up, we'll get to the.
Mr. Chairman, could I have 2 more minutes, please? 1 more minute?
1 more minute's fine.
We need to execute existing funding with the Defense Health Program, which was allocated to take care of the survivors and their families. And we should fully implement the Havana Act. And we need a VA diagnostic code, because right now there is none. We need to award Purple Hearts and their civilian equivalents. On the legislative front, we need a new NDAA that covers this and a Havana Act. I would like to thank this committee for their attention in this issue. Thank you to Oriana Zill, Michael Ray, Michael Weiss, and Christo for keeping this issue alive. I urge this committee to take care of our unseen survivors, execute existing funding, and most importantly, pressure the government to fight back. Thank you.
Thank the witness. The chair now recognizes Mr. Grozev for his opening statement of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear committee members. My interest in investigating the anomalous health incidents occurred at around the time that there was the initial publicity around the Havana cluster. And as a journalist, I just watched from the sidelines and believed that U.S. intelligence and U.S. law enforcement are going to get us the truth. And I was looking forward to that until one day I was approached through a friend, a common friend, by a member of the U.S. intelligence community in Europe who advised me or nudged me or asked me to look into this independently. And I realized that there's something possibly limiting the capabilities or the willingness of U.S. Law enforcement or intelligence to do a thorough study. That's when I started looking into this as my own investigation. And over time, it grew into a multi-country investigation involving the Spiegel in Germany, the Insider in Russia, and our colleagues from CBS 60 Minutes, with whom we joined hands in 2023. I would like to present a summary of our findings as of this moment, but mind you, our investigation is still in progress. Based on extensive interviews with victims, families, and also analysts who agreed to talk to us, we can now state that to our own comfort and conviction, there's at least 68 incidents that cannot be explained away with psychosomatic symptoms or pre-existing conditions. And we've taken those as the bare minimum that allowed us to create a time-space map. A time-space map that allowed us to geolocate these incidents and further match them to possible travel of potential culprits. And that was an important first part of our investigation. We established that the Russian government, as Lieutenant Colonel Green said, had the long-standing motive and plans to develop something that they call wave weapons. This is a term they use as a catch-all term for both acoustic and directed energy electromagnetic weapons. This has started back in Soviet times. There are several patents that we've reviewed from the 70s. However, the real boost to this program occurred in 2013 when President Putin created a special R&D institute called the Institute for Prospective Military Studies in Russia, which was tasked with, among other things, developing new physical property weapons, including wave energy. We know that there have been many awards issued by this institute, and that they do annual contests, closed-door contests for military engineers providing prototypes and testing data on such weapons. We've obtained documentary evidence that in 2017, a military engineer serving in a commanding position in GRU's clandestine sabotage and assassination unit, known as 29155, was the recipient of the annual award from this institute for a project that was termed Testing Non-Lethal Acoustic Weapons Suitable for Use in Urban Warfare. Notably, this same military commander was immediately promoted to a political position as a personal representative of President Putin in the Far East of Russia. It's a very rare switch in a career of a secret spy in Russia, which is usually given after a kinetic achievement. And there are many examples in the past that I won't go into. Unit 29155 is the most aggressive clandestine sabotage unit of Russian military intelligence that has been responsible, as many of us know, for offensive operations such as the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal with Novichok, a series of devastating explosions at NATO munition facilities in Europe spanning 2011-2018, the poisoning of 3 Bulgarian people involved with selling weapons to Ukraine, and we've established that spies of this unit, including the commander, Andrei Veryanov, have had sustained communication with military scientists from Russian military institutes, including the Institute for Prospective Studies, but also the 16th Research and Development Institute, with specific competence and background in researching the effect of electromagnetic and acoustic waves on the human brain. We've also established that a medical research facility affiliated with the GRU in St. Petersburg has shown specific interest in researching the effect of ultra and infrasound on the human brain, and a medical facility linked to that particular institute has conducted research in a very rare medical condition known as the Miner syndrome, which we have seen occurring among a subcohort of the actual American victims of AHI. And crucially, we've established that members of this same clandestine unit have traveled extensively around the world under false identities and have been in the proximity of, or within feasible reach, of confirmed AHI incidents in at least 4 cases, including Frankfurt in 2014, China in 2016 and 17, Tbilisi in 21, and further overlaps of people linked to this unit we've seen in Belgrade and Hanoi. The totality of the evidence uncovered by our team has proven that Russia has the motive, the means, and the opportunity to have developed and used non-lethal acoustic or electromagnetic wave weapons against members of the US intelligence and law enforcement community. Members of the unit 29155 were present in locations and at times directly preceding or coinciding with known Havana incidents in at least 4 cases, and there are many more that we're yet to discover. I'll close with just a personal statement. These findings present not a smoking gun, but a very plausible operational theory on the existence, origin, and culprits behind the AHI. I expect the United States intelligence community will address our findings on their substance, on their merit, including providing alternative explanations for why these people, who are known to only engage with kinetic operations, with assassinations, poisoning, explosions, never in intelligence gathering, were at the wrong time, at the wrong place, if they continue to believe that none of this can be attributed to a foreign adversary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grozev. And the chair now recognizes Mr. Zaid for his opening statement of 5 minutes.
Chairman, ranking member, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today and testify about a topic that has mostly silently plagued our nation's intelligence, diplomatic, military, and law enforcement personnel in some form for decades, and that is anomalous health incidents, or AHIs. I've had the privilege of representing federal AHI victims and their family members for over a decade, years before the issue came to prominence with the 2016 attacks in Havana, Cuba. I now represent more than 24 federal AHI victims, as well as numerous lawful whistleblowers from within CIA, DIA, ODNI, NSA, Departments of State and Commerce, USAID, and the FBI. The victims are not just selfless public servants, but their spouses, children, including infants, and even pets. These criminal attacks have primarily taken place overseas on multiple continents, but have also occurred on our homeland, in Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, Florida, and elsewhere. As part of my first case, I was provided an unclassified memorandum by NSA in October 2014, 2 years before Havana, that revealed the existence of intelligence information concerning a foreign adversary, quote, with a high-powered microwave system weapon that may have the ability to weaken, intimidate, or kill an enemy over time and without leaving evidence. The 2012 intelligence information indicated that this weapon is designed to bathe a target's living quarters in microwaves, causing numerous physical effects, including a damaged nervous system, end quote. Today's hearing can only present a sliver of relevant information. The overwhelming majority of evidence concerning AHIs is hidden behind classified walls. Having had authorized access to classified information on this topic, but without revealing that information, it is my view that the executive branch, particularly at the behest of and manipulation by officials within CIA, is not truthfully reporting what it knows. While I commend their acknowledgement that AHI victims are suffering genuine and compelling health effects, I am convinced that the evidence that exists in the classified arena directly contradicts the public conclusions expressed by federal agencies as to the origin, cause, and scope of AHIs. That review of that evidence would lead reasonable people to conclude one or more foreign adversaries are behind at least some of these incidents, and that numerous federal agencies have failed to fully undertake substantive investigations, deliberately delayed collecting or ignored crucial, credible evidence, and have intentionally withheld information even from sister agencies so as to influence and manipulate their decision-making process. There is intelligence, scientific, and medical evidence that substantiates the existence of AHIs and that some of the attacks were perpetrated by a foreign adversary. That evidence can be specifically identified in the proper classified setting. That said, there's a wealth of publicly available information concerning the history of directed energy, and particularly its scientific, intelligence, and military applications. I provide an overview in my written testimony. Given the many years our government has been experimenting with developing directed energy weapons, why would anyone not believe our adversaries are engaged in the same efforts? A recent investigation by 60 Minutes, Der Spiegel, and The Insider identified potential credible links between AHIs and alleged Russian operatives from Military Unit 29155. This included activities within the United States. What was the government's response? CIA doubled down that there is nothing to see and that it knew of and had already ruled out the same evidence. That is a blatant falsehood that has infuriated many serving members of the intelligence community because so much of the evidence to the contrary is available to them in reports, briefings, and cable traffic. Of course, this evidence is classified. Today's hearing is not going to solve the controversy that AHI presents, but there are many steps that Congress can take. These include ensuring continual and consistent health care for AHI victims, ensuring immediate implementation of and funding for the Havana Act of 2021, as well as amending it where necessary, investigating why law enforcement and other Homeland agencies have not been permitted to pursue AHI leads concerning criminal attacks on American personnel, and instead CIA analysts who do not possess the same skill sets or authorities have been allowed to control the investigations, and require the executive branch to develop comprehensive standard protocols that provide U.S. personnel and their families with guidance as to risks involved and how best to report any incidents. It is time for the U.S. government to be on the right side of history. I welcome the opportunity to try and answer your questions and providing you with classified responses in the proper secure setting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tide. Members will now be recognized in order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning, and if time allows, an additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. Without objection, the chair seeks permission for the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest, and the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, to also waive on to this committee. Without objections to order. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning, and again, thank the witnesses for your statements. I'll start with you, Mr. Grozev. Maybe give us an idea of how this could happen in the United States. Talk us through a scenario that you've investigated that technology and location, things that we can kind of put it into context and understand in layman's terms?
In terms of technology, I'm not an expert in the technology behind this, but I've read enough and I'm sufficiently technically minded to understand that there's more than one way to achieve this same effect on the human brain. And one of the most disturbing denials that I've seen in some of the publications leading up to our findings being published was an attempt to create the impression that no technology would allow this impact on the human brain. That is provably untrue. There have been experiments that prove that both acoustic and waves, directed waves in the ultrasound, primarily in the ultrasound band, but also electromagnetic directed energy, especially pulsed nanosecond energy beams in the millimeter band through something called the Frey effect, which converts electromagnetic energy into an acoustic band wave that can be within or without or outside of the audible band, can have the same effect on the human brain, which can have long-term concussion-like symptoms, but in really traumatic degree of concussion. So that is a given, and I don't think today we have the expertise to talk about that, but there's sufficient evidence that that is possible. We also know that the Russian intelligence apparatus has worked on that, and something I would like to mention as well is that after our publication, a former member of Russia's intelligence community reached out to me and said, well, this is what we've been working on since the 80s, because we thought that the Americans were doing that to us, and we wanted to develop a counter-technology for the same thing. So, of course, we're doing that, which is interesting because Russian intelligence officers believe they're doing this, and American intelligence officers saying they're not doing this.
Did this individual, this Russian agent, remain anonymous?
Unfortunately, for their own safety, I'll have to leave them anonymous. But it's a person with, in my view, sufficient knowledge of exactly the intents, the red lines that this entity would be exposed to. We know that members of this unit have engaged with scientists who have worked on a project called reversal of epilepsy symptoms through radio waves, which, for anybody known how Russia intelligence formulates their findings for the public-facing domain, should read them as the exact opposite, creating, reversing essentially the polarity might leave with the exact opposite effect, creating epilepsy symptoms, and so on and so forth. This interest is long-running for the GRU, for Russia's military intelligence. One last thing I will mention is that we found that the only other place, other than among the cohort of American and Canadian intelligence and law enforcement officers who have been affected by this, that we've seen very, very similar symptoms, was in a Russian school in 2017. And we found the evidence to this similarity in a hacked email box of a military researcher from the St. Petersburg Institute for Experimental Medicine working for the GRU. This institute showed uncanny interest in exactly what happened in that school, where 26 children complained of exactly the symptoms that we've received in this investigation from American officers and diplomats. And again, it was this institute that followed up and did research and may have been behind those incidents in Russia, where we don't see them anywhere else other than around Russian operatives.
Mr. Said, is it your belief that these attacks have happened inside the United States? And if so, can you give us some of the locations and details that you can share with us?
Yes, without a doubt, they have happened here in the United States. As I mentioned in my opening testimony, we know of quite a number, and I would say perhaps the majority of them were in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area. There are also a number, particularly of FBI personnel down in Florida. I do know of some other locations of which I can tell you more about in a more private situation, not necessarily because of classification, but for privilege of the individual client not to reveal it. But there is no doubt there have been quite a number of cases here, particularly relating to the CIA. CIA and FBI most predominantly, also State Department.
Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize the ranking member for his line of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, what I've heard today is very disturbing. Before I get to my questions, I just want to reiterate that we're going to do everything we can to assure that the victims, those that are suffering, will receive consistent health care for what is ailing you. But, Mr. Edgren, the evidence, no intentional attack, yet what I'm hearing from Mr. Zaid, Mr. Grozev, is that there's a possibility that something is out there attacking us, especially in Homeland. Mr. Edgren, based on what Mr. Zaid just said, what are your thoughts?
My personal thoughts
As an intelligence officer.
is that I agree with them. My personal opinions is that this is a global campaign, and it includes attacking us here at home. It is a strategic issue that is going to impact us.
Is this a attack by the Russians, just the Russians, and is it against the U.S. solely or other allies as well?
I have to be careful what I say here. So let me say this.
And if I can, say what you can. And if you gentlemen feel better talking about this in a more secure setting,
I'll start by
we can
saying
work
this.
on that as well.
Congressman, thank you for the question. Give me 20 minutes in a skiff, and I'll convince all of you. I know where the bodies are buried. I know the cabinets to look in, the questions to ask, and the people to subpoena. I will say that this is a global campaign, and it's focused on attacking our people, the best of our people. It's not the middle-range people that are being attacked. It's those that are succeeding in providing work that winds up on the president's desk every morning. So it's a massive issue. It's something that doesn't come to light, and it's something that, especially with the Department of Defense survivors, the unseen, they're totally left out of this because the Havana Act doesn't cover your active duty members. They're told to go to the VA, but there's no VA diagnostic code, so we're not getting them care. It's not consistent. We have funding available that's allocated that we could provide to take care of all of our people in our government. We're not using it. That's why I'd urge you to contact the Defense Health Program.
In my last 2.5 minutes, would you say this is more on behalf of the U.S. government in terms of what we've been looking at? Is this more of a malfeasance as opposed to misfeasance?
It's a good question. I'm sure, just like so many other issues, it's a combination. I can't explain some of the obstacles that those in the government have erected to block information. I can tell you, firsthand that I have...
Your opinion would be that that information is being blocked?
There is information that is absolutely being blocked from one agency to the other, particularly at the CIA. I mean, that's who we're going to point to the most, of information that the CIA has that its sister intelligence agencies it hasn't been shared with. And I can identify a number of specific classified documents in a proper setting.
Mr. Grozev, any thoughts?
I would like to be the devil's advocate and allow for the possibility for some legitimate reasons why the U.S. government and intelligence offices, agencies might not want to make this a public issue. One of the few legitimate explanations for this, in my mind, is the fear of proliferation of such a weapon in case it becomes widely known that it's achievable, feasible, and maybe not too costly to manufacture. That's why I don't require public answers to our findings, but I encourage skiff answers to everything we found out to you and to government, so that we exclude the possibility that it's, if that is the case, of an attack on American officials by the Russian state.
Is there any way to protect our officials from these weapons?
This is exactly why I do not take into account a possible legitimate reason for hiding this, because from my personal point of view, making this public is the best protection.
My last few seconds, Mr. Edgren. Any thoughts?
The best way to protect our people is to fight back. When you're hit in the shadows, you have to hit back twice as hard and tell your adversary why you did that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm out of time. I'll yield.
The gentleman yields. Now recognize the gentleman From Arizona, Mr. Crane, for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today. Thank you to our witnesses for showing up. Many Americans, including other members that I've spoken to recently, don't exactly know what to think of these anomalous health incidents. I spoke to one the other day, just yesterday, who said, I thought that was debunked. Like Havana syndrome, where our citizens are claiming very serious medical conditions following perceived attacks. And after hearing your testimonies, it sounds like all three of you believe that these are hostile actions orchestrated by our adversaries against American citizens. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Not all of them, of course.
Okay. And I can't remember which one of you said at least 68 incidents that you believe to be attacks using these type of weapons. Is that correct?
At least 68 incidents, I said, cannot be explained away with pre-existing conditions or psychosomatic symptoms.
Can you go over again real quick, Mr. Grozev, why you believe that our nation's own law enforcement and intelligence investigations have concluded the opposite of the claims made here today?
One general observation, and again, I don't know the answer, but based on my 10 years of investigation of Russian intelligence operations and observing the parallel findings of law enforcement and intelligence publications, I find that there's an over-reliance on something that a colleague and a victim, a colleague of the victims and a victim himself, called the drinking straw insight that is unfortunately used for many of the conclusions. Reliance on human intelligence sources that may be recruited within the Russian intelligence community, who are asked, do you know if this is you guys? And the answer may be no, and that may be a very honest, sincere answer. From my investigation, it's clear that any operation like this is heavily compartmentalized and it's firewalled to a degree where even other members of the same unit might not be aware that this has been going on. And to rely on human intelligence for conclusions of this stature is probably very inefficient. What we do find is unexplained travel. We find unexplained communications that all point to a very plausible and internally consistent theory that these people are behind the attacks. Again, I can see several reasons why the U.S. intelligence might not want to make that public, but they must make it known to qualified and in a secure setting and provide answers to our findings.
Guys, if your assessments here are correct, these are very covert weapons, aren't they? They don't leave behind bomb fragments, bullet holes, etc. They could absolutely be used by our adversaries and have very low levels of, very easy to deny that they were even there, that they were used. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's no entry or exit wound. How they're designed is to make the target feel like they're crazy, like they're imagining things, especially on the low duration, the low intensity, long duration hits.
But you were saying that the targets are most often always either CIA, FBI, intelligence, law enforcement individuals. Is that correct?
No, I said diplomats, intelligence community, and Department of Defense make up the lion's share. You often don't hear about the Department of Defense, despite DoD having 5 or 10 times the number of survivors that Department of State has.
Thank you for that correction, sir. And you guys also said that these attacks are happening right here in this city. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
I mean, there have been some that have gone public with respect to Washington, D.C. The particularly credible ones, and I'm not saying that those are not credible, but the ones that have received the most attention on the inside of the intelligence community are in Northern Virginia, and they are particularly of CIA personnel.
I think it was Mr. Grozev said you spoke to a Russian agent who said that they believe that Americans are using these same weapons on them. Is that correct?
That is correct, back in the 80s.
Might that have something to do with part of the CIA's motive to cover up the existence of this tech and these weapons?
That is a very logical possibility.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman, for his round of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Mr. Grozev, I want to follow up a little bit on the interactions you've had with Russian intelligence about these AHIs. If you had a conversation with an intelligence officer a Russian intelligence officer where he or she said that these are the same weapons that were used in the 1980s, isn't that an admission that they know they're using them now?
It is an admission that it's very plausible that they're being used now because the person was not privy to this particular operation. He is or she is retired, but again, the important thing is that he was serving at a time when there was a concerted effort for the Russian intelligence services to develop a counter weapon, and he believed, given time passed since then, it has been developed.
I see. So he has retired, but believes that based on the similar symptoms, or what other factors went into his?
Very, very similar symptoms were being conveyed in terms of Soviet diplomats stationed abroad of intelligence background had returned back to Russia to the Soviet Union with symptoms that they believed were caused by an acoustic weapon. That was their belief. It's not the fact that it is what happened. But again, it explains partly the motivation for them to develop a weapon that will be targeting exactly the type of people that we see being targeted.
And I know there's some geospatial data that indicates there were Russian intelligence officers near alleged incidents abroad. Do any of you know whether that is also the case for any of the incidents that have been reported domestically?
I do not have that data because the particular unit that we've focused on, they would not dare come to the United States. Therefore, if the Russians were doing this on US soil, they would have used sleepers, long-term proxies that would be here. But that is not a unit that I've discovered in my own career.
And therefore, difficult to identify as affiliated with Russian intelligence.
Sir, I think you should refer that last question to the FBI and classified spaces.
Yeah, obviously, the episode with my client, an active FBI agent that was authorized to speak to 60 Minutes, talks about an incident in Key West, and most of that information is either law enforcement sensitive or classified.
Are any of you aware of any reported incidents from individuals who are not members of the United States government, domestically, I should say?
I am not, but I will throw a caveat in there. Generally, I only focused on former and current government employees that were attacked.
Mr. Zaid, are you?
There are many people who believe they are victims of AHIs. All you have to do is look at my Twitter feed whenever I post on the topic. I only represent federal government employees and their families, so I don't focus on the accuracy of those particular claims.
And Mr. Grozev, do you have any insight?
Not on American soil, but in other parts of the world, there have been complaints that appear to be credible from Russian activists or Russian opposition leaders living abroad.
And Mr. Zaid, I want to ask, and this is a hypothetical, but I'm trying to understand why our government would try to block information sharing or conceal information that they have. And one thing that comes to mind is whether there's an operational risk to revealing any details of their investigation. Is that something that you have come across in any of your work?
Yes, and quickly, because I know your time is elapsing here. So I do think that is, and I agree with Mr. Grozev, there's a lot of reasons why the information might not be publicly released. And I do think that's something we could address more in a classified environment to explain that. But there are understandable reasons why the U.S. government has not revealed much of what it knows. But the question is, how about to you?
But also, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to follow up on that, there is a conclusion that has been made public that it is highly, highly, highly unlikely, I forgot what the language is, that these symptoms were caused by some sort of foreign malign actor.
So the last OD&I assessment that came out in 2023 had indicated, and it, to the public, it seems very damning. This highly unlikely that a foreign adversary was involved. But if you actually look at the levels within each of the agencies as to the level of credibility that they have assessed to that is actually quite low for most of them. And there's a lot of pushback, even internally, among some of the intelligence agencies as to the qualification of that information. I'll say just very quickly, finally, they talk about, in particular, I think one of the CIA's public documents, that many of these cases can be explained through environmental factors, pre-existing medical conditions, but they don't explain any of that, which could easily be said in another sentence. The environmental factors include the following, whatever. We looked at prior health conditions, and 85% had football injuries when they played in high school and college. None of that information is in there, which leads one to believe that there's something more. The other thing I'll say just really quickly on that, the news media missed the story on that CIA assessment. They said they looked at more than 1,000 cases, and they concluded the vast majority could be explained otherwise. But there are at least 24 cases that even the CIA acknowledges they can't explain away by any other alternative factors. That, to me, is the story that should have been in the New York Times and the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, that there are 24 cases the CIA can't even explain away.
Is that part of your 68, Mr. Grozev?
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you. And I thank the chair and our ranking member for allowing me to wave on to this hearing. And I thank the panelists. This is an issue that I know well from 8 years on the House Intelligence Committee. And I first just want to say to Mr. Zaid that your clients, who you represent, are heroes, and the people who were subjected to this are American heroes. I've met a number of them, and they served their country abroad. They toiled away, oftentimes without their family, leaving everything here in the United States, and oftentimes without any of us really having a sense of what they are doing, and they were exposed to this. And this condition, when you meet with the victims, is completely debilitating. It changes your life, it turns it upside down, and if you're a young parent, life is already disorienting. And if you're subjected to this, it's even more difficult to be a parent, put yourself through this, the questions you have. But something that I've been struck by in meeting with so many of these victims is, yes, they want to get well themselves. They have an obligation to their families to take care of their families. They have expectations of the agencies that they work for. But in every single one of them, they want to share as much as possible to prevent the next attack. So their sense of duty, even after being attacked and even after being debilitated, is still, I don't want this to happen to somebody else. And Mr. Zaid, I don't know if you can animate that just a little bit as to the patriotism of the people you represent and wanting to get to the bottom of this.
No, thank you, Congressman. I agree 100%. And it was mentioned by Mr. Ed Green, the notion of these oftentimes are the best of the best who have been impacted. And I have heard repeatedly from so many of them that what they want to achieve here is to make sure that their peers, their colleagues, and their future colleagues do not have this happen to them. And they want to go back to work. I mean, this is, most of them were in their 30s and 40s when they were impacted and would still have long careers ahead of them. And they want nothing more than to put their efforts into working for the national security interests of the United States. They are true heroes. I agree 100%.
And as we think forward about, what can we do, and this is the Homeland Security Committee. Obviously, this issue crosses jurisdictions, the House Intelligence Committee, Armed Services Committee, and Homeland Security Committee. But I would just welcome from the Lieutenant Colonel, how should we be thinking about this on the homeland? And if this is indeed, a foreign adversary, using a technology or a technique, how do we prevent it from coming onto the homeland, where the target environment is even richer than Americans abroad?
Thank you, sir. First of all, I must say that yes, there's much needed legislation. We need a new Havana Act, something that's not a one-term payment. It was a great step in the right direction, but it had some shortcomings that we're going to fix in the next go-around. What you're referring to would obviously have to fall under the next Homeland Security Act and securing our borders. Because if I, hypothetically, was going to plan an operation, I'd have to get a couple guys across our border. They would go pick up a weapon and then start surveilling a target and then hit them and then disappear. And so I think there's a larger question there that I'm not qualified to answer, but there's some long-term things that needs to be done in terms of new acts. But in the short term, we need to do things like implement the original Havana Act. Yeah. DOD still hasn't done it. They still have not implemented the Havana Act. And we need a VA diagnostic code. Thanks to the VFW brothers and sisters that are here today and for your meeting earlier, we don't have a VA diagnostic code for the 500-some DOD survivors. Yeah. How are they going to get long-term care and disability without that?
Yeah. Well, I hope this issue you see in a room that is often contentious, explosive, volcanic, that you've got members on both sides who first honor and salute the victims and want to do everything we can to make sure that they're made whole, and if they can return. And then, of course, as the victims have wanted to do, make sure we do everything possible to prevent anyone else from suffering from this. And I yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
I think the gentleman will now enter a second round of questioning. I know we have a couple of other members who were seeking to wave on, and we will again alternate according to seniority on both sides of the aisle. So I recognize myself for another round of questioning. Let me just kind of go back to Mr. Ed Green. When you look at, what is your, analysis of how many victims you can identify that have occurred here in the United States, and then, secondly, what's been the response by government agencies to those victims from the time that they report it to the communication between agencies, if any communication exists, and maybe focus a little bit on the FBI?
Yep, thank you. I can't get into specifics about the numbers, but after having talked with Mr. Zaid about this, I could say comfortably.
Why can't you talk about the numbers just so everybody can understand?
Because numbers and specific locations of attacks are classified. But I can tell you roughly 20 to 30% of the cases that I saw were in the homeland. In terms of the response on the homeland, it gets tricky because it involves authorities here within the FBI. And what I have found is that we needed a faster response mechanism. The U.S. government doesn't have a central clearinghouse for AHIs. Okay. So let's say someone in the Air Force is attacked on soil. How do you quickly find out about that and freeze the crime scene and go out and evaluate it?
And there's no coordination that's happening in between departments and agencies and organizations?
It's happening, but it's very slow. It involves letterhead memorandum that takes weeks to process. CCTV footage expires in this town within 24 hours.
Talk to me about the classification. Who classified it?
You'd have to ask the ODNI.
Okay, but
They oversaw all things related.
Your understanding and what you're testifying to now is it is classified, so there is an acknowledgement of an issue.
Clearly,
Okay.
sir, there is.
Mr. Grozev, I'll ask you the same question. How has the FBI handled the complaints and the, you want to call them, not if you want to call them, the victims and their, I guess, reaching out to within the FBI? How have they handled it?
I'm not privy to that investigation. From my incidental observations, my belief is that the FBI feel that they have to toe the line of the intelligence community on this topic, and some of them feel that they wish they could do more to protect their own colleagues.
Okay. Are they being told, is it your feeling that they're being told from superiors or others within the FBI to stand down?
I do not have evidence they've been told, but being patriots, it might be a self-imposed limitation to not contradict the overall finding of the Director of National Intelligence.
I'll ask the same thing to you, Mr. Zayed. Is that your understanding, or is there something similar to that going on?
Without a doubt, I think the FBI is becoming better, more receptive, but I'll give you a perfect example. In March of 2021, the FBI drafted a workforce message concerning AHIs to go to everyone about what to do, how to report it. It took them 6 months to issue that notice. During that time, my client, Carrie, who's in the 60 Minutes episode, was hit. That workforce message still didn't go out, and it took a long time to even get medical care for many of the FBI victims. It has been a complicated process. There are specifics that we could absolutely provide to in a more protected environment, more so for the privacy of the individuals, but also from a classification standpoint that would show you where the system has broken down.
How high does this go? I mean, we're talking about, as has been testified to today, high, successful, well-performing people. But, I mean, can you give us some details about how high this goes in our government?
From a victim standpoint?
Yes,
or
from a victim standpoint.
I mean, it has been reported individuals connected to the NSC and the White House have been impacted.
As Lieutenant Colonel Ed Green, those that could brief the president up to.
Yeah, and some of them have been public in some prior 60 Minutes episodes of believing that they have been impacted. And I mean, there would be evidence that would be in the classified sphere.
Of the incidents that are happening in, say, Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., are family members also reporting having symptoms and being attacked?
Not as many. Usually it has been in the overseas locations where the family members have been impacted, generally because it is, as I described in that NSA memo, bathing the residents. And, they have no idea who might be inside the residence. Yeah. That's where literally pets have been impacted because they've been in the beam, the wave, whatever. There have been government buildings impacted in Northern Virginia, and it's usually been individuals either in their home, hotels, or driving.
Is it the panel's belief that this is primarily happening from attributed to Russian operatives?
I've said this before, there's an extremely strong Russia nexus. Inside China, I think that changes a bit.
And quickly, Mr. Grozev.
We have the specific evidence of Russian operatives being in China at the time when American diplomats suffered incidents. This could not have happened without the knowledge and at least passive cooperation by Chinese intelligence, which means Chinese intelligence would be exposed to the capabilities and possibility of such a weapon, which probably means they have developed their own version or borrowed it from Russia.
Thank you. All right. My time's expired. I recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Edgren. We started talking about, the lack of government action recognizing this issue. You compared this to Agent Orange and some of the other ailments our military personnel have suffered, and it takes decades to acknowledge that, yes, this is an issue, it's a medical issue to be taken care of, to be treated on a long-term basis. It's kind of where we started today. I think that I agree with you and with the chairman and Mr. Swalwell, who worked on this issue for a long time, that we do have to take care of the victims the best we can. Now we're shifting to something else, which is essentially a cover-up. What you all are saying is there's a government cover-up of the fact that something is out there afflicting, targeting us. Is this where we're going with this?
Thank you. Great points. I won't get into classification of the problems. I will tell you that the government in the IC assessment is wrong. It's dead wrong. I can't tell you if it's a cover-up, why they're doing this, malfeasance. I won't go there. What I can tell you is that it's my firm belief we already have attribution. Right now is the time for action, retribution, and we need to prioritize taking care of our people, because there's a lot of survivors and their families that have been attacked here in the homeland that are in a long wait line to get to Walter Reed because we're not executing funding that's already been allocated by you gentlemen to take care of these survivors. You fix Walter Reed and the Defense Health Program, everyone benefits.
Mr. Zaid.
So, sir, I've been working in the national security field for 30 years, representing some of our most covert intelligence officers, who I respect a great deal, and the agencies. The word cover-up, I will tell you that there are many legitimate reasons why there could be what the agencies are doing, to explain why they are doing it. What I will tell you is
Would you
that
say,
the public
would you use a
statements...
cover-up as a statement or other words?
So cover-up would depend on intent. There could be good reasons to withhold information. I will say that the public statements that the executive branch is making is inconsistent with the classified record. And then it would be Congress's job as an oversight authority to determine why that is, whether it was a legitimate reason to mislead the public or because of some nefarious reason, or all the above. But the record on the inside in the classified theater is not consistent with the public statements.
Mr. Grozev.
If this is true, and it depends partly on classified data that I'm not privy to, then it's a judgment call that was made to mislead the public in the interest of national security interest. But it will be up to Congress to decide whether that judgment call was correct. One additional effect of such a judgment call that may not have been taken into account is the effect of encouraging the hostile power. In the hypothesis that this is indeed a Russian covert operation, and the whole intelligence community of the United States has publicly denied this ever happening, this will be such a trigger, such an incentive for Russia to escalate, and it will be, for somebody who knows how the mind of President Putin works, I can tell you that if they did it, and the United States government has concluded they didn't do it, this will encourage an escalation in the war in Ukraine. This will encourage an escalation because this person thinks the rest of the world are complete idiots, and really that's how his mind works. So take this into account when you assess the judgment call.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Chairman, go ahead, Mr. Edgren.
I would just like to thank this committee for focusing on this issue. One of the things we always did at the DIA was not questioning the individual. Are they really having symptoms? We got immediate care for every single symptom. And I think that's the right way to do it. In terms of attribution, I think we over-empowered CIA analysts. And when they kicked it up the food chain to OD&I for NIC assessment, when you look at it, the people they kicked it up to were other CIA analysts on loan. So this was a self-licking ice cream cone. We need more people inside the Department of Defense or with an operational background to look at this. Because if you show an analyst flowers, they're going to look for a wedding. You show a case officer those flowers, they're going to look for a funeral.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
And I thank the ranking member. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This next question is for Mr. Zaid and Ed Green. Are either of you aware of any individuals who have AHI symptoms have passed away from their ailments?
I do.
I do.
Do we know how many that you're aware of? Do we need to discuss that somewhere else?
For the privacy of the families, it's a small community.
Right. Mr. Chairman, are we going to be able to move into a classified setting at some point or at another time?
I think that possibility will exist at a later time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's concerns that the FBI has totally dropped the ball on this investigation. Would the panelists agree with that assessment?
I would, and I would say that a great question for you to ask is to the FBI, how many people did you have assigned to this? And they're going to come back with a big number. And then you're going to ask, how many people were assigned to this full time? And then you're going to see the looks on their faces. Because by my accounts, I had roughly 2 officers from the field office, I had a GS-15 at headquarters, and an analyst. And the best one out of all of them was the analyst. And I'll say they all had additional duties. That wasn't their main job. They were doing things like looking at January 6th, looking at terrorism threats here in DC. So it's been very small. It hasn't been resourced properly. And anytime you work with the FBI, and this is fascinating because I did my whole career abroad, it's easier. They put things into a black box. And one of the main problems we had is they had on a criminal hat, crim as they say in the FBI, and not a CI hat.
Gotcha. Do you believe that Homeland Security investigation should get engaged in this investigation?
Absolutely, because they were cut out. You only had, I believe, my time there, 1 Homeland Security officer. She was an analyst for Secret Service. Homeland Security investigation should be involved.
Have any of you 3 panelists ever seen one of these weapons?
I have seen a 1991 version of the weapon, and it looks like a satellite dish with a unit this size attached to it. And of course, over the years, miniaturization has been possible. Obviously, there's a limitation to how miniaturized it can be because of the antenna size, which is always related to the wave. But still, it is something that can be well contained in the trunk of a car or even a large backpack.
Is this a type of weapon that could be cobbled together once foreign operatives are on our own soil, or is this something that would have to be manufactured in a nation state?
My experience shows that it can be cobbled together. It's something that can, a rough, crude version of this that would probably require longer exposure than the more advanced version that has been tested, as we see from this document, can be put together inexpensively. But again, I would abstain from commenting further, lest I encourage people to try it at home.
That would make this weapon and this tactic even more dangerous, wouldn't it, Mr. Grozev?
Correct.
Can you tell us, sir, about this contract you discovered for these weapons?
The contract was an award by the Institute for Prospective Military Studies, an annual award that means that this was the best development for a unit, research and development achievement for a unit whose goal is to encourage the production and manufacturing and discovery and invention in the area of new weapons, that both lethal and non-lethal. I know that this same commander won the award of this institute 2 years in a row. We're only privy to one of his devices, to one of his achievements. We don't know what the subsequent years' delivery from him was. But again, I mentioned this in order for you to understand that the perceived value, the perceived merit by the Kremlin of this particular award, of this particular achievement, was high enough for it to be the only award for the year, and for this person to achieve a political placement, a position that is not usual for a security operative. And this is the value of our finding. This was a very momentous moment for the Kremlin, this particular achievement.
Mr. Chairman, can I have 30 more seconds? I think it was you, Mr. Grozev, who said that in your investigation, you were able to conclude that one of these units who was operating on our soil was found near individuals that contracted these illnesses. How were you able to confirm this unit's proximity to individuals who experienced these injuries?
We've used over the years a amalgamation of data sources from the Russian market of data, which is a unique phenomenon. We've obtained border crossing data, we've obtained ticketing data, hotel reservation data, and telephone communication data for essentially 60 members of this unit that we've identified over the years.
Have any of them been apprehended, Mr. Grozev?
Several of them have been indicted. 6 of them are indicted in Bulgaria including the person that we just referred to, the engineer who discovered the acoustic weapon or delivered it. They're indicted, but they're well hidden in Russia and cannot be apprehended.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. This now concludes the questioning portion of the hearing. And I'd like to thank the witnesses. I'd like to thank you for your time, your service, for being able to come here today and share with us. Obviously, as my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have said, the health, the well-being of all of the service members and government officials, it's very concerning. What we've heard today is very concerning. And, I think as we look at the next steps, I would just encourage continued communication with this subcommittee, with other subcommittees and committees that are looking at this as well. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask you to please respond to these in writing. And pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.